Captain Marcus Blackwood had served the royal guard for 15 years, and in all that time, he had never heard Princess Isabella cry out in genuine fear. The sound that echoed through the marble corridors of Thornfield Palace that autumn evening was unlike anything he had witnessed before. It wasn't the theatrical distress of a young woman denied her wishes, nor the frustrated anger that sometimes accompanied royal tantrums. This was raw terror, and it made his blood run cold. The captain had been making his routine evening patrol when the scream pierced the silence. He was walking through the east wing, checking the security of the princess's quarters as he did every night before the palace settled into its peaceful slumber. The corridors were dimly lit by ornate chandeliers, their crystal drops casting dancing shadows on the silk-covered walls. Everything had seemed perfectly normal until that moment when Princess Isabella's voice rang out with desperate urgency. "Jonathan, Jonathan, please help me." The name struck Captain Blackwood like a physical blow. Jonathan. There was no one by that name currently serving in the palace, no courtier or visiting dignitary who bore that title. Yet the princess had called out for this mysterious person with such desperation that it suggested intimate familiarity. The captain's mind raced through possibilities as his boots thundered against the polished marble floors, his sword bouncing against his hip with each hurried step. Princess Isabella was 17 years old, intelligent beyond her years, and known throughout the kingdom for her grace and composure. She had been groomed since childhood to one day assume the throne, as she was the only surviving heir to King Edmund's legacy. Her mother, Queen Catherine, had died in childbirth when Isabella was born, leaving the king to raise his daughter with the help of trusted advisors and an army of tutors. The princess had always been sheltered, protected from the harsh realities of the world beyond the palace walls, yet she possessed a curious spirit that sometimes concerned those charged with her safety. As Captain Blackwood approached the princess's chambers, he could hear muffled sobbing through the heavy oak door. His hand instinctively moved to the hilt of his sword as he considered the possibilities. Had someone gained unauthorized access to her private quarters? Was she in physical danger? The palace security was among the finest in the realm, with guards posted at every entrance and patrols covering every corridor throughout the day and night. Yet the captain knew that determined individuals with sufficient motivation could sometimes find ways to breach even the most carefully constructed defenses. The captain paused outside the door, listening carefully for any sounds that might indicate the presence of an intruder. He could hear the princess moving about inside her chambers, her footsteps packing back and forth across the Persian rugs that covered the stone floors. There were no other voices, no sounds of struggle or conflict, yet her distress was clearly audible through the thick walls. "Your Highness," Captain Blackwood called out, his voice firm but respectful, "are you in need of assistance?" The packing stopped immediately, and for a moment, complete silence filled the corridor. Then came the princess's voice, shaky but attempting to regain its usual composure. "I am quite well, Captain Blackwood. There is no cause for concern." The captain frowned. After 15 years of service, he had developed an acute ability to read the subtle inflections in royal voices, to distinguish between genuine dismissal and attempts to hide distress. Princess Isabella's response carried undertones of fear and uncertainty that contradicted her words entirely. "Your Highness, I heard you call out in distress. Palace protocol requires that I verify your safety personally." Another long pause followed, during which the captain could hear what sounded like papers being shuffled or perhaps clothing being hastily arranged. When the princess spoke again, her voice was closer to the door. "I had a nightmare, Captain, nothing more than that. I apologize if my cries disturbed your patrol." Captain Blackwood considered this explanation carefully. Nightmares were certainly plausible for a young woman bearing the enormous pressure of eventual queenship, especially given the recent tensions with neighboring kingdoms. However, something about the princess's tone suggested that her distress involved more than mere dreams. "Your Highness, you called out for someone named Jonathan. Is there anything you wish to discuss regarding this person?" The silence that followed was so complete that Captain Blackwood began to wonder if the princess had somehow left her chambers through a passage he was unaware of. The palace contained numerous secret corridors and hidden exits, remnants of more dangerous times when royal families needed multiple escape routes. While most of these passages had been sealed or converted to storage spaces, a few remained accessible for emergency purposes. Finally, the princess spoke, and her voice carried a note of resignation that surprised the captain. Captain Blackwood, I believe we should speak face to face. Please give me a moment to make myself presentable. The captain stepped back from the door and assumed a formal stance, his hands clasped behind his back and his eyes focused on the tapestry that hung across from the princess's quarters. The tapestry depicted the coronation of King Edmund 25 years earlier, showing the young monarch accepting the crown from the archbishop, while nobles from across the kingdom looked on in reverent silence. It was a scene that reminded everyone who passed through this corridor of the weight of royal responsibility and the solemnity of the duties that Princess Isabella would one day inherit. Several minutes passed before the heavy door opened with a soft creak of its iron hinges. Princess Isabella appeared in the doorway, dressed in a simple white nightgown with a silk robe wrapped around her shoulders. Her long auburn hair fell in loose waves around her face, and her green eyes showed clear evidence of recent tears. Despite her obvious distress, she maintained the regal bearing that had been instilled in her from earliest childhood. "Thank you for your concern, Captain," she said, gesturing for him to enter her chambers. "I believe you deserve an explanation for the disturbance." Captain Blackwood stepped into the princess's private quarters, immediately noting several details that seemed unusual. A writing desk near the window was covered with papers, some of which appeared to be letters written in an unfamiliar hand. A small portrait that he had never seen before sat prominently on the mantelpiece above the fireplace. Most significantly, a leather-bound journal lay open on the princess's bed, its pages covered with her distinctive handwriting. The captain's eyes briefly scanned the visible text in the journal before he forced himself to look away, respecting the princess's privacy. However, he had caught enough words to understand that the entries dealt with someone named Jonathan and involved matters of considerable emotional significance to the princess. "Your Highness, my primary concern is for your safety and well-being," Captain Blackwood said carefully. "If you are being contacted by someone outside the palace, or if you have concerns about any individual, it is my duty to investigate and ensure that you are not being manipulated or threatened in any way." Princess Isabella moved to the fireplace and stood with her back to the captain for several long moments. When she turned around, her expression had shifted from distress to a kind of determined resolve that the captain recognized as distinctly royal in nature. "Captain Blackwood, what I am about to tell you must remain strictly confidential. I am trusting you with information that could have serious implications for the stability of the kingdom if it were to become public knowledge." The captain nodded gravely. Throughout his years of service, he had been entrusted with numerous royal secrets, from minor personal scandals to matters of international diplomacy. His discretion and loyalty were among the qualities that had earned him his position as head of the Royal Guard. "You have my word, Your Highness. Whatever you choose to share will be held in the strictest confidence." Princess Isabella returned to her writing desk and picked up one of the letters that lay scattered across its surface. The paper was of fine quality, but bore no official seal or marking that would identify its origin. She held it for a moment, as if weighing the consequences of her decision to share its contents. "3 months ago, I began receiving correspondence from a young man who claims to be my brother." The words hung in the air between them like a physical presence. Captain Blackwood felt his breath catch in his throat as the implications of this revelation began to sink in. Princess Isabella was known throughout the kingdom as King Edmund's only child, the sole heir to the throne. The existence of a brother, legitimate or otherwise, would fundamentally alter the line of succession and could potentially destabilize the entire monarchy. "Your Highness," the captain said carefully, "are you certain of the authenticity of these claims?" Princess Isabella handed him the letter she had been holding. The handwriting was bold and confident, that of an educated person accustomed to formal correspondence. The paper bore a watermark that suggested expensive stationery, and the ink appeared to be of high quality. "His name is Jonathan Aldrich," the princess continued as the captain examined the letter. "He claims to be the son of my father and a woman named Margaret Aldrich, who served as a lady-in-waiting to my mother during the early years of her marriage. According to his letters, this woman gave birth to him 18 months before my own birth, making him my elder brother, and by rights, the legitimate heir to the throne." Captain Blackwood read through the letter quickly, his trained eye noting details that might suggest forgery or deception. The writing style was sophisticated and demonstrated familiarity with court protocol and royal genealogy. More disturbing still, The letter contained specific details about palace life and royal customs that would be difficult for an outsider to obtain. "Has he provided any proof to support these claims?" the captain asked. Princess Isabella returned to her bed and picked up the leather journal, turning several pages until she found a specific entry. "He has sent me documents that appear to be legitimate birth records, as well as a locket that belonged to Margaret Aldrich. The locket contains a miniature portrait that bears a striking resemblance to my father as a young man." The captain felt a chill run down his spine as he considered the implications of what he was hearing. If these claims were true, then Princess Isabella was not the rightful heir to the throne, and everything that the kingdom had planned for the future would need to be reconsidered. Moreover, the existence of a secret heir could provide enemies of the crown with a powerful weapon to use against the current royal family. "Your Highness, why has this Jonathan chosen to contact you directly rather than approaching the king or presenting his case through official channels?" Princess Isabella closed the journal and held it against her chest, as if drawing comfort from its familiar weight. "He claims to fear for his safety. According to his letters, Margaret Aldrich was forced to leave the palace when her pregnancy became known, and she was sworn to secrecy about the identity of the child's father. She raised Jonathan in a remote village, telling him only that his father was a nobleman who could never acknowledge him publicly. It was not until her death 2 years ago that he discovered documents revealing his true parentage." The captain walked to the window and gazed out at the moonlit gardens below, his mind working through the various possibilities and dangers that this situation presented. In the distance, he could see the lights of the capital city, where thousands of citizens slept peacefully, unaware that their understanding of royal succession might be built on incomplete information. "Your Highness, what does Jonathan want from you? Has he made any demands or requests?" Princess Isabella joined him at the window, and for a moment they stood side by side in contemplative silence. "He says he wants nothing more than to meet his father and to understand his place in the world. He claims to have no desire for the throne or for any official recognition. However, Captain, I must confess that I find myself torn between skepticism and a growing conviction that his claims may be genuine." The captain turned to study the princess's profile as she gazed out at the night sky. Her usual composed demeanor had been replaced by an expression of deep uncertainty and emotional turmoil that reminded him of just how young she truly was, despite her royal training and responsibilities. "What evidence has convinced you to take his claims seriously?" he asked gently. Princess Isabella returned to her writing desk and retrieved a small wooden box that had been hidden beneath a stack of other papers. She opened it carefully, revealing a delicate silver locket on a fine chain. Even in the dim light of the chamber, the captain could see that the piece was of exceptional craftsmanship and considerable age. "This belonged to Margaret Aldrich," the princess said, opening the locket to reveal the miniature portrait inside. "Jonathan sent it to me as proof of his claims." Captain Blackwood examined the portrait carefully, and his heart sank as he recognized the familiar features. The miniature showed a young man with the distinctive auburn hair and green eyes that were characteristic of the royal bloodline. The resemblance to King Edmund in his youth was unmistakable, and the captain realized that he was looking at what could very well be evidence of a royal bastard, whose existence had been carefully hidden for nearly 2 decades. "Your Highness," the captain said quietly, "this is a matter that extends far beyond palace security. The implications for the kingdom are enormous, and I believe that your father must be informed immediately." Princess Isabella shook her head firmly. "That is precisely what I cannot do, Captain. Jonathan has made it clear that he fears retribution if his existence becomes known to my father. He believes that there are those who would go to great lengths to eliminate any threat to the established line of succession, including ending his life if necessary." The captain understood her dilemma all too clearly. Royal bastards throughout history had often met unfortunate ends when they became inconvenient to those in power. Even if King Edmund himself harbored no ill will toward a previously unknown son, others in the court might view Jonathan's existence as a dangerous complication that needed to be resolved permanently. Then what does Jonathan propose? He cannot remain hidden forever, and if his claims are legitimate, they will eventually surface regardless of his wishes or fears. Princess Isabella returned to her bed and sat down heavily, the weight of her secret clearly taking its toll on her composure. "He has asked to meet with me in secret. He wants to present his evidence directly and to gauge whether I believe his claims to be genuine. Based on my response, he will then decide whether to approach our father or to disappear entirely and never trouble the royal family again. Captain Blackwood felt a surge of protective instinct as he considered the dangers inherent in such a meeting. A secret rendezvous with an unknown individual claiming royal blood could easily be a trap designed to kidnap or harm the princess. Even if Jonathan's intentions were genuine, the very act of meeting him would put Princess Isabella at considerable risk. Your Highness, such a meeting would be extremely dangerous. You would be placing yourself at the mercy of someone whose true identity and intentions remain unknown. As head of your security detail, I cannot allow you to undertake such a risk. Princess Isabella looked up at him with eyes that held a mixture of determination and desperation. Captain Blackwood, for the first time in my life, I may have discovered that I have family beyond my father. The possibility of having a brother, someone who shares my bloodline and understands the burden of royal heritage, is not something I can simply dismiss. I need to know the truth, regardless of the personal cost. The captain saw in her expression the same stubborn resolve that had characterized her father throughout his reign. King Edmund was known for his unwillingness to be dissuaded from a course of action once he had committed to it, and it appeared that his daughter had inherited this particular trait in full measure. If you are determined to pursue this matter, the captain said carefully, then it must be done with proper precautions and security measures. You cannot simply meet with this Jonathan alone and unprotected. Princess Isabella rose from the bed and moved to stand before her mirror, examining her reflection as if seeing herself for the first time. He has specified that he will only meet with me if I come alone. He claims to fear that the presence of guards or advisors would compromise his safety and prevent him from speaking freely about sensitive matters. Captain Blackwood recognized the tactical advantage that such a demand would provide to someone with malicious intentions. By insisting that the princess come alone, Jonathan would eliminate any witnesses to whatever might transpire during their meeting. It was exactly the kind of condition that someone planning kidnapping or worse would impose. Your Highness, that requirement alone should raise serious concerns about this individual's true motives. A legitimate claimant to royal blood would understand the need for proper security protocols. Princess Isabella turned away from the mirror and faced the captain directly. Perhaps, Captain, or perhaps someone who has lived his entire life in hiding, believing himself to be the bastard son of a king, would naturally fear the very security forces that serve the royal family he has never been permitted to acknowledge. The logic of her argument was sound, and Captain Blackwood found himself torn between his duty to protect the princess and his growing recognition that she would not be dissuaded from her chosen course of action. He had served the royal family long enough to understand that when a member of the bloodline became truly determined to pursue something, opposition often served only to make them more creative in their methods rather than abandoning their goals entirely. Where and when does this Jonathan propose to meet? The captain asked, resigned to the fact that his role would need to shift from prevention to damage control. Princess Isabella returned to her writing desk and retrieved another letter from the scattered papers. Tomorrow night, at midnight, in the old chapel ruins beyond the eastern forest. He chose the location specifically because it is far enough from the palace to avoid routine patrols, yet close enough that I could travel there and return before my absence would be noticed. Captain Blackwood knew the location well. The chapel ruins were the remnants of an ancient monastery that had been abandoned for more than a century. The site was isolated and surrounded by dense forest, making it ideal for clandestine meetings, but also providing numerous hiding places for potential ambushers. The tactical disadvantages of the location were obvious to anyone with military training. Your Highness, if you are absolutely determined to proceed with this meeting, then I insist on accompanying you, regardless of this Jonathan's preferences. Your safety is my primary responsibility, and I will not allow you to place yourself in such obvious danger. Princess Isabella considered his words for a long moment before nodding slowly. I understand your position, Captain, and I appreciate your willingness to compromise rather than simply forbidding me to go. However, I must ask that you remain hidden during our initial conversation. If Jonathan proves to be genuine and trustworthy, then you may reveal yourself. But if he is indeed fearful for his safety, your visible presence might cause him to flee before I have the opportunity to learn the truth. The captain agreed to this arrangement, though he privately resolved to position himself close enough to intervene at the first sign of danger. He would bring additional guards to surround the area at a distance, ensuring that escape routes were covered while maintaining the appearance of the princess being alone. As their conversation drew to a close, Captain Blackwood realized that the next 24 hours would be among the most challenging of his career. He would need to plan and execute a security operation that protected the princess while appearing to honor the demands of a potentially dangerous stranger. Moreover, he would need to do all of this while maintaining absolute secrecy about the entire affair. "Your Highness," he said as he prepared to leave her chambers, "I will make the necessary arrangements for tomorrow night's expedition. However, I must stress once again that this meeting carries enormous risks, not just to your personal safety, but to the stability of the entire kingdom. If Jonathan's claims prove to be genuine, the political implications will be far-reaching and potentially destabilizing." Princess Isabella nodded solemnly. "I understand, Captain, but I also understand that some truths are too important to remain hidden, regardless of their inconvenience. If I truly have a brother, then he deserves the opportunity to present his case, and I deserve the chance to know my family." As Captain Blackwood left the princess's chambers and resumed his patrol, his mind was already working through the tactical challenges that lay ahead. He would need to select guards who could be trusted with sensitive information, plan routes that would allow for rapid response to any threats, and develop contingency plans for various scenarios ranging from Jonathan's failure to appear to a full-scale ambush. The next day would test every skill he had developed during his years of service, and the outcome would determine not only the safety of Princess Isabella, but potentially the future of the kingdom itself. The following morning brought unseasonably cold weather to the kingdom, with a sharp wind that rattled the windows of Thornfield Palace and sent servants scurrying through the corridors with extra firewood for the hearths. Captain Blackwood had slept little after his conversation with Princess Isabella, spending most of the night reviewing palace security protocols and developing strategies for the evening's dangerous mission. As dawn broke over the palace grounds, the captain began his careful selection of personnel for the operation. He needed guards who possessed not only exceptional skill and loyalty, but also the discretion to handle sensitive royal matters without question or gossip. After considerable deliberation, he chose Sergeant William Fletcher and Corporal David Morrison, both veterans of border conflicts who had proven their reliability in high-stakes situations. Captain Blackwood summoned the two men to his private office within the guard barracks, a spartanly furnished room that contained little beyond a desk, several chairs, and detailed maps of the palace grounds and surrounding territories. The walls were adorned with weapons from various campaigns and a portrait of King Edmund in his military uniform, reminders of the serious nature of their duties. "Gentlemen," the captain began once his subordinates were seated, "I am about to share information with you that is classified at the highest levels of palace security. What I tell you must never leave this room, and your participation in tonight's mission must remain absolutely confidential, even from your fellow guards." Both sergeants nodded solemnly, understanding that such secrecy was occasionally necessary when dealing with matters that could affect the royal family or the stability of the kingdom. Throughout their careers, they had been involved in various operations that required complete discretion, from investigating potential threats against the monarchy to handling diplomatic incidents that could embarrass the crown if made public. Captain Blackwood provided them with carefully edited details about the evening's mission, explaining that Princess Isabella had received information about a potential security threat that required investigation. He described the meeting at the chapel ruins as a necessary intelligence-gathering operation, without revealing the specific nature of Jonathan's claims or their potential implications for royal succession. "The princess will be meeting with an individual who may possess information relevant to kingdom security," the captain explained. "Our role is to provide invisible protection while allowing the conversation to proceed naturally. The subject has insisted on meeting alone with Her Highness, so our presence must remain completely hidden unless an emergency arises." Sergeant Fletcher, a grizzled veteran with 20 years of military experience, asked the obvious tactical question. "Sir, what level of threat are we expecting? Should we prepare for potential combat, or is this more likely to be a routine information exchange?" Captain Blackwood considered his response carefully. He needed to ensure that his men were prepared for serious danger without revealing the full scope of the situation they were walking into. "We should prepare for any possibility," he said finally. "The individual in question is unknown to our intelligence networks, and his motives remain unclear. While he has made no overt threats, the isolated location and secretive nature of the meeting suggest that we should be ready for trouble." Corporal Morrison, younger but equally experienced in palace security operations, raised another concern. "Captain, how do we maintain visual contact with the princess while remaining hidden in an area as open as the chapel ruins?" The captain unrolled a detailed map of the eastern forest and pointed to the ancient monastery site. "The ruins provide several vantage points that will allow us to observe the meeting while remaining concealed. There are remnants of stone walls and collapsed buildings that can serve as cover, and the surrounding forest offers additional hiding places. We will position ourselves in a triangular formation around the meeting site, with overlapping fields of observation and clear lines of communication." As the three men studied the map and discussed tactical details, Captain Blackwood felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a physical burden. He was essentially betting Princess Isabella's life on his ability to read the situation correctly and respond appropriately to whatever threats might emerge. If Jonathan proved to be an assassin or kidnapper, the captain's decisions in the next few hours could determine whether the kingdom retained its heir or plunged into a succession crisis that could last for generations. Meanwhile, throughout the palace, Princess Isabella went about her normal daily routine with remarkable composure, giving no indication of the momentous meeting that awaited her that evening. She attended her morning tutorials with the court philosopher, participated in a diplomatic briefing regarding trade negotiations with neighboring kingdoms, and met with representatives from several charitable organizations that operated under royal patronage. To outside observers, the princess appeared to be her usual gracious and engaged self, asking thoughtful questions during her lessons and offering insightful comments during policy discussions. Only those who knew her extremely well might have noticed the subtle signs of nervous energy that occasionally manifested in restless movements or moments of distracted attention. During her lunch with Lady Margaret Thornton, her longest-serving lady-in-waiting, Princess Isabella found herself struggling to maintain her usual conversational flow. Lady Margaret had served the royal household for nearly 40 years, beginning her career as a young woman during the reign of King Edmund's father, and her experience had given her an almost supernatural ability to detect when members of the royal family were troubled or preoccupied. "Your Highness," Lady Margaret said gently as they shared a meal of roasted pheasant and autumn vegetables, "forgive my observation, but you seem somewhat distracted today. Is there anything troubling you that I might help address?" Princess Isabella forced a smile and shook her head. "I am quite well, Lady Margaret. Perhaps I am simply feeling the effects of the changing season. The sudden cold weather has left me somewhat restless." Lady Margaret studied the princess's face with the practiced eye of someone who had spent decades interpreting royal moods and concerns. "Your Highness, I have had the privilege of serving 3 generations of your family, and I have learned to recognize when members of the royal bloodline are carrying burdens that they feel unable to share. If there is anything weighing on your mind, please know that my discretion and loyalty are absolute." For a moment, Princess Isabella was tempted to confide in the older woman. Lady Margaret had been like a grandmother to her throughout her childhood, providing comfort during difficult times and wise counsel when royal duties seemed overwhelming. However, the princess understood that the secret of Jonathan's existence was too dangerous to share with anyone beyond those absolutely necessary for her protection. "I appreciate your concern," Princess Isabella said warmly, "but I assure you that nothing is troubling me beyond the normal pressures of royal responsibility. Perhaps I am simply growing anxious about the upcoming diplomatic reception for the Bavarian delegation." Lady Margaret accepted this explanation with a gracious nod, though her expression suggested that she remained unconvinced. Throughout the remainder of their meal, she continued to observe the princess with subtle concern, making mental notes to increase her vigilance in the coming days. As afternoon faded into evening, Captain Blackwood made his final preparations for the night's mission. He personally inspected every piece of equipment that would be carried by his small team, ensuring that their swords were sharp, their armor was properly fitted, and their communications signals were clearly understood by all participants. The captain had chosen to use a system of owl calls and other natural forest sounds to maintain contact between the position guards, allowing them to share information about potential threats without revealing their presence to anyone who might be watching the area. Each man carried a small silver whistle that could produce tones that mimicked common nocturnal birds, providing a backup communication method if their primary signals failed. As the palace settled into its evening routine, Princess Isabella dismissed her servants earlier than usual, claiming a desire for solitude and early rest. She waited in her chambers until the corridors outside grew quiet, then changed into dark riding clothes that would allow her to move through the forest without being easily spotted by potential enemies. The princess had chosen practical leather boots, dark woolen trousers, and a forest green cloak that would blend with the natural environment around the chapel ruins. She tied her distinctive auburn hair back severely and covered it with a dark hood, understanding that her recognizable appearance could make her a target for anyone with hostile intentions. At precisely 11 o'clock, Princess Isabella made her way through the palace's lesser-known corridors to a side entrance that was used primarily by servants and delivery personnel. Captain Blackwood was waiting for her in the shadows near the door, already dressed in the dark leather armor that palace guards wore for nighttime operations. "Your Highness," the captain said quietly, "my men are already in position around the meeting site. Sergeant Fletcher is concealed among the ruins themselves, while Corporal Morrison is positioned in the forest to the north. I will accompany you to the chapel and then take a position that allows me to observe the entire area while remaining hidden." Princess Isabella nodded, her expression serious but determined. "Captain, I want you to understand that I am grateful for your protection and your willingness to honor my request to meet with Jonathan. However, if he proves to be genuine and trustworthy, I may need to have extended conversations with him that could last well into the night. You must be prepared for that possibility." The captain had anticipated this concern and had instructed his men to bring sufficient supplies for an all-night vigil if necessary. "We are prepared for any duration, Your Highness. However, I must stress once again that if this Jonathan person shows any signs of hostility or deception, you must follow my instructions immediately and without question." Together, they made their way from the palace through the formal gardens toward the eastern forest. The night was clear but moonless, providing excellent cover for their movement while also creating challenges for navigation and observation. Captain Blackwood led the way along paths that he had memorized during his years of service, moving with the silent efficiency of someone trained in covert operations. The journey to the chapel ruins took approximately 45 minutes, during which they encountered no other travelers or unexpected obstacles. As they approached the designated meeting site, Captain Blackwood used his owl call signal to communicate with his positioned guards, receiving confirmation that the area remained secure and that no suspicious individuals had been observed. The ancient chapel ruins stood in a small clearing, surrounded by towering oak and elm trees that had grown up around the abandoned structure over the past century. Moonlight filtered through the bare branches, creating patterns of light and shadow across the broken stone walls and collapsed archways that had once been part of a thriving religious community. Princess Isabella stood in the center of the ruins, exactly as Jonathan's letter had specified, while Captain Blackwood melted into the shadows behind a partially collapsed wall that provided an excellent view of the entire area. The captain's heart was pounding with nervous energy as he scanned the surrounding forest for any signs of movement or potential threats. The appointed hour of midnight came and went with no sign of Jonathan's arrival. Princess Isabella remained in position, her cloak wrapped tightly around her shoulders against the cold wind that whistled through the broken stones. Captain Blackwood began to wonder if they had walked into an elaborate hoax or if Jonathan had changed his mind about the meeting at the last moment. Then, at approximately 15 minutes past midnight, a figure emerged from the forest on the southern side of the clearing. The individual was tall and moved with confident strides that suggested military or aristocratic training. As he approached the ruins, Captain Blackwood was able to observe his appearance in the filtered moonlight. Jonathan Aldrich, if that was indeed who this person claimed to be, appeared to be in his early 20s with dark hair and a lean but strong build. He wore simple traveling clothes that could have belonged to a merchant or minor nobleman, and he carried no visible weapons. Most significantly, his facial features bore an unmistakable resemblance to Princess Isabella, particularly around the eyes and jaw line. "Your Highness," Jonathan said as he approached the princess, his voice carrying the educated accent of someone who had received proper schooling despite his claimed humble origins. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me. I know that my request placed you in a difficult and potentially dangerous position." Princess Isabella studied his face carefully in the dim light, and Captain Blackwood could see her sharp intake of breath as she recognized the family resemblance that was apparent even to him from his hiding place. "You are Jonathan Aldrich?" she asked, her voice steady despite the obvious emotional impact of seeing him in person. "I am," he replied, reaching into his traveling bag to withdraw a leather portfolio. "I have brought additional evidence to support my claims, including documents that I discovered among my mother's possessions after her death. I believe you will find them illuminating, though I warn you that some of the information they contain may be disturbing." Jonathan opened the portfolio and handed Princess Isabella several aged documents. Even from his concealed position, Captain Blackwood could see that the papers appeared to be official records of some kind, complete with wax seals and formal signatures. "These are baptismal records from the parish church in Millfield, where my mother raised me," Jonathan explained. "They show my birth date and list my father as unknown. However, this second document is a letter that my mother wrote to your father, King Edmund, shortly after my birth. She never sent it, but it clearly states that I am his son and requests his acknowledgement and financial support." Princess Isabella read through the documents carefully, her expression becoming increasingly troubled as she absorbed their contents. Captain Blackwood found himself torn between his duty to protect her and his growing curiosity about the evidence that was being presented. "The handwriting in this letter," Princess Isabella said slowly, "appears to match samples I have seen of correspondence from that time period. The details about court life and royal protocol are accurate and specific. However, I must ask you directly, what do you hope to gain from revealing this information? If you truly are my father's son, your claim to the throne would supersede my own." Jonathan shook his head firmly. "Your Highness, I have no desire for the crown or for any official recognition that would threaten your position. I was raised as a commoner, and I am comfortable with that life. My mother made it clear that royal acknowledgement was never a possibility, and I have accepted that reality. What I seek is much simpler and more personal." "What do you want?" Princess Isabella asked. "I want to know my father," Jonathan replied, his voice carrying a note of longing that seemed genuine to Captain Blackwood's trained ear. "I want to understand where I came from and to have the opportunity to meet the man who gave me life. Beyond that, I confess that the idea of having a sister, someone who shares my bloodline and understands the complexities of royal heritage, appeals to me greatly." Princess Isabella was quiet for several long moments, and Captain Blackwood could see her struggling with the emotional weight of the situation. If Jonathan's claims were genuine, then she was indeed meeting her brother for the first time, discovering family that she had never known existed. "The evidence you have shown me is compelling," she said finally, "but I need time to verify its authenticity and to consider the implications of your revelations. This is not a decision I can make impulsively, as the consequences could affect not just our family but the entire kingdom." Jonathan nodded understandingly. "I expected as much, Your Highness. I am prepared to wait for your decision, whatever form it might take. However, I must ask for your discretion in this matter. If word of my existence were to spread before you have had time to present the situation to your father in the appropriate manner, I fear that there are those who would view me as a threat to be eliminated rather than a family member to be acknowledged." Captain Blackwood felt a chill of recognition at these words, understanding that Jonathan's fears were entirely justified. Royal bastards throughout history had often found themselves the targets of assassination attempts when their existence became inconvenient to those in power. "You will have my discretion," Princess Isabella assured him. "However, I must also ask for patience as I navigate this situation carefully. The revelation of your existence will need to be handled with enormous delicacy to avoid destabilizing the monarchy or creating opportunities for our enemies to exploit." Jonathan reached into his portfolio once more and withdrew a small, sealed envelope. "This contains the address where I can be reached over the next several weeks. I am staying in a small inn approximately 2 days' ride from here, under an assumed name for my own protection. When you have made your decision about how to proceed, you can send word through the innkeeper, who believes I am simply a scholar researching regional history." Princess Isabella accepted the envelope and tucked it safely into her cloak. "I will contact you as soon as I have determined the best course of action. However, I must warn you that this process may take considerable time, as I will need to research your claims thoroughly and consider various approaches to presenting this information to my father." As their conversation began to wind down, Captain Blackwood noticed movement in the forest beyond the chapel ruins. His hand instinctively moved to his sword hilt as he tried to determine whether the motion was caused by wind moving through the trees or by someone attempting to approach the meeting site undetected. The captain used his owl call signal to communicate with Sergeant Fletcher and Corporal Morrison, receiving responses that indicated they had also detected the disturbance, but had not yet identified its source. Captain Blackwood felt his tension increase as he realized that they might not be alone in the forest. "Your Highness," Jonathan said, apparently oblivious to the potential danger developing around them, "before I leave, there is one more thing I would like to share with you. My mother told me stories about the royal family throughout my childhood, and she always spoke of your father with great respect and affection. Whatever circumstances led to their brief relationship and my subsequent birth, she never expressed bitterness or resentment about his inability to acknowledge me." Princess Isabella smiled at this revelation, and Captain Blackwood could see that Jonathan's words had touched her deeply. "That speaks well of both your mother's character and her understanding of the complexities of royal duty. I hope that, when I meet her through your memories and stories, I will find someone I can respect and admire." The movement in the forest was becoming more pronounced, and Captain Blackwood realized that multiple individuals were attempting to surround the chapel ruins. His worst fears were being realized as it became clear that someone had learned about the secret meeting and was moving to exploit the situation. The captain made a difficult decision, understanding that the immediate safety of Princess Isabella took precedence over maintaining the secrecy of their protection. He stepped out from his concealment, his sword drawn and ready for combat. "Your Highness," he called out urgently, "we need to leave immediately. We are no longer alone in this forest." Jonathan spun around in surprise at the captain's sudden appearance, his hand moving instinctively toward a concealed weapon. For a tense moment, Captain Blackwood wondered if he had been wrong about the young man's intentions, and if Jonathan himself was part of whatever trap was being sprung. "Captain Blackwood," Princess Isabella said quickly, "this is Jonathan Aldrich, the person I came here to meet. Jonathan, this is Captain Blackwood, head of the Royal Guard and my most trusted protector." Jonathan's hand moved away from his weapon, and he nodded respectfully toward the captain. "Captain, I apologize for the secrecy of this meeting, but I assure you that my intentions toward Her Highness are entirely honorable." Captain Blackwood acknowledged the introduction with a curt nod, but his attention remained focused on the approaching threat. Through the trees, he could now see flickering torchlight that suggested a significant number of armed individuals were surrounding their position. "Explanations will have to wait," the captain said grimly. "Right now, we need to move quickly and quietly if we hope to avoid whatever trap has been set for us." The torchlight grew brighter through the trees as at least a dozen armed figures moved methodically toward the chapel ruins, their coordination suggesting military training and careful planning. Captain Blackwood quickly assessed their tactical situation and realized that escape through conventional routes would be nearly impossible without engaging in open combat. "This way," the captain whispered urgently, leading Princess Isabella and Jonathan toward the northeastern corner of the ruins where a partially collapsed wall provided temporary concealment. "Stay low and move quietly. Our survival depends on reaching the forest before they complete their encirclement." As they crouched behind the ancient stones, Captain Blackwood used his signal whistle to communicate with Sergeant Fletcher and Corporal Morrison, alerting them to the developing threat and requesting immediate assistance. The responding calls indicated that both guards had identified multiple hostiles and were moving to create an escape corridor for the princess. Jonathan proved to be surprisingly capable in the crisis situation, moving with the silent efficiency of someone trained in stealth and evasion. He stayed close to Princess Isabella, clearly understanding that her protection was the primary objective despite his own obvious danger as a potential witness to whatever was unfolding. "Who are these people?" Princess Isabella whispered to Captain Blackwood as they waited for an opportunity to move toward the forest. "Unknown," the captain replied grimly. But their coordination and timing suggest that someone with access to palace intelligence knew about tonight's meeting. This was carefully planned, not a random encounter. The implications of his words were chilling. If someone within the palace had leaked information about the secret rendezvous, then the royal family faced a security breach that went far beyond the immediate physical danger they were currently experiencing. There could be spies or traitors within the highest levels of the royal household. Jonathan reached into his traveling bag and withdrew a well-crafted dagger, its blade gleaming even in the dim moonlight. "Captain, I am not helpless in a fight if it becomes necessary. My mother ensured that I received training in both swordplay and archery, understanding that someone with my questionable heritage might face unique dangers." Captain Blackwood nodded approvingly, recognizing that any additional combat capability would be valuable in their current circumstances. However, he also noted that Jonathan's possession of quality weapons and his apparent military training raised additional questions about his true background and current circumstances. Through the ruins, they could hear the approaching attackers calling out to each other in hushed voices, their words indistinct, but their intent clearly hostile. The captain counted at least 15 different voices, suggesting a force large enough to overpower his small protective detail through sheer numbers if they were forced into direct confrontation. A sharp whistle from the forest indicated that Sergeant Fletcher had engaged the enemy and was attempting to draw their attention away from the princess's position. Almost immediately, the sounds of combat erupted from the northern edge of the clearing, as steel clashed against steel and men shouted orders to their companions. "Now," Captain Blackwood hissed, leading his charges in a crouching run toward the tree line while the attackers were distracted by the fighting. They covered the open ground quickly, reaching the relative safety of the forest just as torchlight began to illuminate the ruins they had abandoned. Once among the trees, Captain Blackwood led them along a narrow deer path that wound through the dense undergrowth toward a secondary rendezvous point that he had established with his guards before the mission began. The forest was alive with the sounds of pursuit, as their attackers realized that their primary targets had escaped the initial ambush. "Captain," Princess Isabella said as they paused behind a massive oak tree to catch their breath, "we cannot abandon Sergeant Fletcher and Corporal Morrison to these attackers. They are risking their lives to protect me, and I will not allow them to be sacrificed for my safety." Captain Blackwood appreciated her concern for his men, but he also understood that the princess's safety took precedence over all other considerations, including the lives of individual guards. "Your Highness, my men understood the risks when they accepted this assignment. Our primary objective must be getting you safely back to the palace." Jonathan spoke up quietly. "There may be another option. I know these forests well from my travels to reach the palace, and there are several paths that could allow us to circle around and assist your men while avoiding the main body of attackers." The captain studied Jonathan's face in the dim light, weighing the risks of trusting someone whose true loyalties remained unverified against the tactical advantages that local knowledge could provide. "What do you propose?" "There's an old hunting trail about half a mile to the east that leads to high ground overlooking the chapel ruins. If we can reach that position, we might be able to assess the situation and provide archery support for your guards without exposing ourselves to direct assault." Captain Blackwood considered the proposal carefully. The tactical logic was sound, and Jonathan's willingness to involve himself in combat to protect royal guards suggested genuine loyalty rather than hostile intent. Moreover, the captain's own knowledge of the area confirmed that high ground would provide significant advantages for both observation and combat. "Very well," he decided. "But understand that if this proves to be a trap or if you show any signs of betrayal, I will kill you immediately, regardless of your claimed relationship to the princess." Jonathan nodded solemnly. "I understand, Captain. My life means nothing compared to Her Highness's safety." They began moving through the forest toward the hunting trail that Jonathan had described, their progress slowed by the need to avoid the torchlit search parties that were spreading through the woods around them. The sounds of combat continued from the direction of the chapel ruins, indicating that Sergeant Fletcher and Corporal Morrison were still alive and fighting, though probably outnumbered and in desperate circumstances. As they climbed the gradual slope toward the high ground, Princess Isabella found herself studying Jonathan more carefully in the brief moments when moonlight penetrated the forest canopy. His movements were confident and purposeful, demonstrating familiarity with woodcraft and tactical thinking that seemed inconsistent with his claimed upbringing as a village commoner. "Jonathan," she said quietly as they paused near a stream to rest, "your skills in this situation suggest training that goes beyond what most ordinary citizens would possess. Have you been entirely honest about your background and circumstances?" Jonathan looked uncomfortable at her direct question, clearly reluctant to reveal additional information that might complicate an already dangerous situation. "Your Highness, there are aspects of my life that I have not shared, primarily because they seem irrelevant to the question of my parentage. However, you are correct that my education and training extend beyond what might be expected for someone of humble origins." Captain Blackwood's attention sharpened at this admission. If Jonathan possessed military training and tactical knowledge, it raised questions about who had provided such education and what purposes it was intended to serve. "Explain." "My mother may have been forced to leave the palace, but she retained connections with individuals who served the royal household. When I was old enough, she arranged for me to receive training from a retired palace guard who had settled in our village. Sir Geoffrey Blackthorne taught me swordplay, archery, horsemanship, and basic military tactics, believing that I might one day need such skills to protect myself." Captain Blackwood recognized the name immediately. Sir Geoffrey Blackthorne had indeed served with distinction in the Royal Guard for more than 30 years before retiring to a small village in the eastern provinces. The old knight's reputation for honor and loyalty was beyond question, and his involvement in Jonathan's education provided significant credibility to the young man's claims. "Sir Geoffrey is known to me," the captain said, his tone reflecting new respect for Jonathan's credentials. "If he considered you worthy of his instruction, then your character has been vouched for by someone whose judgment I trust implicitly." They resumed their climb toward the high ground, making better time now that Captain Blackwood felt more confident about Jonathan's reliability and tactical competence. The sounds of combat were becoming more distant, though occasional shouts and the clash of weapons indicated that the battle around the chapel ruins was continuing. When they finally reached the elevated position that Jonathan had described, Captain Blackwood immediately understood the tactical advantages it provided. The high ground offered clear sight lines down to the chapel ruins and the surrounding forest, while remaining concealed from observation by anyone in the lower areas. Through the trees below, they could see the flickering light of multiple torches as the attackers spread through the ruins and surrounding woods. Two figures in dark armor were engaged in desperate combat against overwhelming odds near the collapsed eastern wall of the chapel, clearly identifiable as Sergeant Fletcher and Corporal Morrison despite the distance. "Can you use a bow effectively at this range?" Captain Blackwood asked Jonathan, nodding that the young man was examining the tactical situation with obvious expertise. "Yes, though I will need a weapon. I traveled here expecting a peaceful meeting, not a military engagement." Captain Blackwood unslung the longbow that he carried for emergency situations and handed it to Jonathan along with a quiver of arrows. "These are military-grade shafts with bodkin points, designed to penetrate armor. Choose your targets carefully, as we have limited ammunition." Princess Isabella watched with growing amazement as Jonathan tested the bow's pull and examined the arrows with the practiced eye of an experienced archer. "You seem very familiar with military equipment for someone claiming to be a simple villager." Sir Geoffrey was thorough in his instruction, Your Highness. He believed that half-measures in training often led to complete failures in actual combat. Jonathan nocked an arrow and drew the bowstring to full extension, taking careful aim at one of the attackers who was pressing Sergeant Fletcher hard in single combat. The shot was extremely difficult given the distance, the poor lighting, and the risk of hitting the very person he was trying to protect. The arrow flew true, taking the attacker in the shoulder and spinning him away from Sergeant Fletcher with a cry of pain and surprise. The sudden intervention from an unexpected direction caused confusion among the other attackers, who began looking around for additional threats rather than pressing their assault. "Excellent shot," Captain Blackwood said with genuine admiration. "Can you repeat that accuracy?" "Under these conditions, I can probably manage 3 or 4 more effective shots before they identify our position and begin returning fire with their own archers." Jonathan proceeded to demonstrate the truth of this assessment, placing arrows with deadly precision into 2 more attackers, while Captain Blackwood used his own crossbow to provide additional support. Their combined fire created enough disruption to allow Sergeant Fletcher and Corporal Morrison to break free from the immediate melee and seek better defensive positions among the ruins. However, their intervention had also revealed their location to the enemy forces below. Captain Blackwood could see several of the attackers pointing in their direction, and at least 3 figures were moving up the slope toward their position with obvious hostile intent. "We need to relocate immediately," the captain announced. "They know where we are, and we cannot hold this position against a determined assault." As they prepared to withdraw from their elevated position, Princess Isabella made a decision that surprised both of her companions. Instead of retreating further into the forest, she began moving down the slope toward the chapel ruins, where Sergeant Fletcher and Corporal Morrison were still engaged in combat. "Your Highness," Captain Blackwood called out urgently, "where are you going?" "I will not abandon loyal guards who are fighting for my protection," she replied firmly. "If we are going to escape from this situation, we need to do it together, not by leaving brave men behind to die for my mistakes." Jonathan immediately moved to follow her, understanding that Princess Isabella had inherited her father's stubborn determination along with his royal bloodline. "Captain, she is right. We have the tactical advantage of surprise and high ground. If we coordinate our efforts properly, we might be able to break their assault and create an escape route for everyone." Captain Blackwood realized that arguing with royal determination was futile, and that his best option was to channel the princess's courage into tactically sound action. "Very well, but we do this properly. Jonathan, you continue providing archery support from elevated positions while I move to assist my guards directly. Your Highness, you remain with Jonathan and provide spotting assistance for his shots." They began moving down the slope in a coordinated tactical formation, with Jonathan pausing periodically to provide covering fire, while Captain Blackwood advanced toward the ruins where his guards were holding defensive positions behind the remnants of ancient stone walls. The attackers had clearly not expected organized resistance from multiple directions, and their assault began to falter as arrows continued to find targets among their ranks, while a fresh combatant joined the melee with professional skill and determination. Captain Blackwood reached Sergeant Fletcher's position and immediately assessed the tactical situation. "Report, Sergeant. What are we facing?" "At least 20 hostiles, Captain, all well-armed and coordinated. They knew exactly where to find us and came prepared for serious combat. This was not a random bandit attack." The captain had already reached the same conclusion, understanding that the attackers possessed intelligence about the secret meeting that could only have come from within the palace itself. The security implications were staggering, suggesting that the royal family faced threats from within their own household. "Can you identify any of the attackers? Uniforms, insignia, anything that might indicate their origins or loyalties?" Corporal Morrison spoke up from his position behind a collapsed archway. "No identifying marks, Captain, but their equipment is high quality, and their tactics suggest professional military training. These are not common mercenaries or bandits." Jonathan's arrows continued to provide effective support from the elevated positions around the ruins, forcing the attackers to seek cover and disrupting their attempts to coordinate a final assault. His accuracy remained impressive despite the challenging conditions, and several of the enemy forces had already withdrawn from the combat area due to wounds or demoralization. Princess Isabella proved to be surprisingly effective as a spotter, using her elevated position to identify targets and call out tactical information to the combatants below. Her royal education had included strategic studies that gave her a better understanding of military tactics than might be expected from someone who had never participated in actual combat. "Jonathan, there are 3 archers moving to positions behind the eastern wall," she called out. "If they gain those positions, they will have clear shots at Captain Blackwood and his men." Jonathan immediately shifted his position and began engaging the enemy archers before they could establish their firing positions. His first shot took one of them cleanly, while the other 2 were forced to seek different cover that provided less advantageous angles for their own weapons. The tide of the battle was clearly turning in favor of the royal forces, but Captain Blackwood understood that their current tactical advantage was temporary. If the attackers possessed sufficient numbers and determination, they could eventually overwhelm the small defensive force through simple attrition. "We need to break contact and withdraw while we still have the initiative," he announced. "The longer we remain in fixed positions, the more time they have to bring up reinforcements or develop countertactics." Sergeant Fletcher and Corporal Morrison began a fighting withdrawal toward the northern edge of the ruins, where the forest would provide concealment for their escape route. Jonathan maintained his archery support, while Princess Isabella continued to provide tactical information about enemy movements from her elevated observation post. As they prepared to disappear into the forest, Captain Blackwood made a disturbing discovery among the equipment left behind by the fallen attackers. Several of them carried weapons that bore the distinctive markings of the Royal Armory, suggesting that they had obtained their equipment through official channels rather than black market sources. The implications were clear and terrifying. Someone with legitimate access to royal military supplies had armed these attackers, indicating that the threat came from within the palace hierarchy itself. Princess Isabella was not just facing external enemies, but internal conspirators who possessed detailed knowledge of royal security procedures and access to official resources. "Captain," Jonathan said as they regrouped at the edge of the forest, "I believe I may have additional information that could help explain tonight's attack. However, it involves revelations that could be as dangerous as the physical threats we have just survived." Captain Blackwood looked at the young man with new respect earned through combat, understanding that Jonathan had proven his loyalty and competence under the most demanding circumstances. "What do you know?" "Before arranging to meet with Princess Isabella, I made inquiries about my claimed parentage through certain discreet channels. It is possible that my questions attracted the attention of individuals who view my existence as a threat to the established order of succession." Princess Isabella felt a chill of understanding as she realized the full implications of Jonathan's words. If his claims to royal bloodline were genuine, then there were undoubtedly powerful people who would go to great lengths to ensure that those claims never became public knowledge. The attack on the chapel ruins might have been intended not just to eliminate her as a witness to Jonathan's evidence, but to remove both of them permanently and ensure that the secret of royal succession remained buried forever. As they made their way through the forest toward the palace, Captain Blackwood understood that the night's events had fundamentally changed the nature of the threats facing the royal family. They were no longer dealing with external enemies or simple security breaches, but with a conspiracy that reached into the heart of the monarchy itself. The journey back to Thornfield Palace took nearly 3 hours as Captain Blackwood led his group through circuitous forest paths, designed to avoid potential ambushes and observation by hostile forces. The captain's paranoia had reached new heights following the discovery of Royal Armory weapons among the attackers, understanding that their enemies possessed resources and intelligence that made conventional security measures inadequate. Jonathan proved invaluable during their return journey, demonstrating knowledge of hidden trails and forest shortcuts that even Captain Blackwood had been unaware of despite his years of service. The young man's familiarity with the terrain around the palace raised additional questions about his background and the extent of his preparations for this meeting with Princess Isabella. "You seem remarkably well informed about the geography surrounding the palace," Princess Isabella observed as they paused near a stream to rest and tend to minor wounds sustained during the combat. "Such detailed knowledge suggests more extensive reconnaissance than would be expected from someone making a single visit to present evidence of royal parentage." Jonathan accepted the implied question with a rueful smile. "Your Highness, I confess that I have been in the vicinity of the palace for several weeks, not merely the few days suggested in my correspondence. My mother's death and the discovery of documents regarding my parentage created an urgent need to understand my true heritage, and I felt compelled to observe the royal household before making contact." Captain Blackwood's hand moved instinctively toward his sword hilt at this admission. Extended surveillance of the royal family was typically the work of assassins or foreign agents, and Jonathan's confession placed his motives in an entirely new light. "Explain your activities during these weeks of observation," the captain demanded. "What exactly were you hoping to learn, and who else might be aware of your presence in the area?" "Captain, I understand your suspicions, and they are entirely justified given the circumstances. However, my observations were focused on understanding the daily routines and security procedures that would allow me to approach Princess Isabella safely, not on gathering intelligence for hostile purposes. Jonathan reached into his traveling pack and withdrew a detailed journal filled with handwritten notes and sketches. I documented guard rotations, supply deliveries, diplomatic visits, and other observable activities, but only to identify opportunities for secure communication. I had no intention of using this information for any purpose beyond arranging a single private meeting. Princess Isabella examined the journal with fascination and growing concern. Jonathan's observations were remarkably thorough and accurate, demonstrating both intelligence and gathering skills and patience that suggested professional training rather than amateur curiosity. This level of detail could be extremely valuable to anyone planning an attack against the royal family, she noted. If this journal were to fall into hostile hands, it could compromise palace security in fundamental ways. I understand that, Your Highness, which is why I have kept it carefully secured and shared its contents with no one. However, tonight's events suggest that others may have been conducting their own surveillance operations, possibly with knowledge of my presence and activities. Captain Blackwood studied Jonathan's reconnaissance notes with the expert eye of someone trained in intelligence analysis. The young man's observations included details about individual guards, their personal habits, their areas of responsibility, and their potential vulnerabilities. While the information had apparently been gathered for defensive purposes, it could easily be adapted for offensive operations. "Who trained you in surveillance techniques?" the captain asked bluntly. "These methods are not taught to village commoners, even by retired palace guards." Jonathan hesitated before answering, clearly reluctant to reveal additional information that might further complicate his already precarious situation. Sir Geoffrey Blackthorne's instruction included more than basic combat skills. He believed that someone with my questionable heritage might need to understand both protection and evasion techniques to survive in a world where powerful people might view my existence as inconvenient. The explanation was plausible given Sir Geoffrey's background and reputation, but Captain Blackwood remained troubled by the implications. If Jonathan possessed professional-level skills in surveillance, intelligence gathering, and combat, then his true capabilities extended far beyond what he had initially revealed. As they resumed their journey toward the palace, Princess Isabella found herself wrestling with conflicting emotions regarding her newfound brother. The evidence supporting his claims of royal parentage was compelling, and his behavior during the combat at the chapel ruins had demonstrated genuine concern for her welfare. However, his undisclosed surveillance activities and professional-level skills suggested hidden agendas that could pose significant dangers. "Jonathan," she said as they navigated a particularly treacherous section of forest path, "I need you to be completely honest with me about your intentions and capabilities. Tonight's attack has placed all of our lives in danger, and I cannot afford to base decisions on incomplete or misleading information." Jonathan stopped walking and turned to face her directly, his expression serious and resolute. "Your Highness, you deserve complete honesty, even if it places me in an unfavorable light. My surveillance of the palace was not entirely motivated by desire for family connection. I also hope to gather evidence that might help me understand who was responsible for my mother's forced exile, and whether those same individuals might pose ongoing threats to my safety." Captain Blackwood felt his suspicions crystallizing into certainty that Jonathan's presence represented more than a simple family reunion request. "What kind of threats? And what makes you believe that your mother's departure from the palace was anything other than the natural consequence of an inappropriate relationship with the king?" "Because my mother's personal effects included correspondence suggesting that her pregnancy was discovered by someone who used that information for political leverage against your father. She was not simply dismissed for moral impropriety, but was deliberately removed to prevent the political complications that my existence might have created." Princess Isabella absorbed this revelation with growing alarm, understanding that Jonathan's claims involved not just questions of royal succession, but potential blackmail and political manipulation that could have affected the stability of the kingdom for nearly 2 decades. "Do you have evidence to support these accusations?" she asked. Jonathan nodded grimly. "Letters from individuals whose names you would recognize, discussing the advantages of removing my mother from court and ensuring that her child never gained knowledge of his true parentage." The correspondence suggests a coordinated effort to suppress information that could have been used to challenge your father's reign or your own future succession. Captain Blackwood realized that they were dealing with a conspiracy that extended far beyond the immediate physical threats they had encountered at the chapel ruins. If Jonathan's evidence was genuine, then powerful individuals within the royal court had been actively working to suppress information about royal succession for nearly 20 years. These letters, do they identify specific individuals involved in the conspiracy? They do, Captain, and I believe that some of those individuals may still be alive and in positions of influence within the palace hierarchy. The implications were staggering. If members of the current royal court had been involved in covering up Jonathan's existence, then they would certainly view his return and his evidence as existential threats to their own positions and possibly their lives. Tonight's attack might have been the opening move in a larger campaign to eliminate anyone who possessed dangerous knowledge about royal succession. As they approached the outer boundaries of the palace grounds, Captain Blackwood made the difficult decision to avoid the normal entry points in favor of a secret passage that he had hoped never to use. The hidden entrance was known only to the most senior members of the Royal Guard and was designed for use during extreme emergencies when the palace's standard security had been compromised. "Where are we going?" Princess Isabella asked as they deviated from the familiar paths leading to the main palace entrances. "To a secure location where we can examine Jonathan's evidence thoroughly and plan our next steps without risking exposure to potential conspirators within the palace," Captain Blackwood explained. "Until we understand the full scope of this conspiracy, we cannot trust normal security procedures or personnel." The secret entrance was concealed behind what appeared to be a maintenance shed near the palace's outer wall. Captain Blackwood activated a hidden mechanism that revealed a narrow stairway leading to underground tunnels that connected to various parts of the palace complex. These passages had been constructed during the reign of King Edmund's grandfather as a defense against potential siege situations. The tunnels were dimly lit by oil lamps that were maintained by a single trusted servant who believed they were used only for emergency evacuation procedures. Captain Blackwood led his group through the narrow corridors toward a secure chamber that served as a crisis command center for the Royal Guard's most sensitive operations. The chamber contained maps, weapons, communication equipment, and secure storage for documents that were too sensitive for normal palace archives. Most importantly, it was completely isolated from the palace's regular corridors and communication systems, making it impossible for potential conspirators to observe or overhear conversations that took place there. Once they were safely secured in the underground chamber, Captain Blackwood asked Jonathan to present his evidence for thorough examination. The young man opened his leather portfolio and spread its contents across the chamber's central table, revealing an impressive collection of documents, letters, and personal artifacts that supported his claims of royal parentage. Princess Isabella studied the materials carefully, her royal education allowing her to evaluate the authenticity of seals, watermarks, and handwriting samples with considerable expertise. The evidence was remarkably comprehensive and appeared to be genuine, supporting not only Jonathan's claims about his parentage, but also his allegations about political conspiracy and cover-up. "This letter," she said, picking up a document bearing the seal of Lord Chancellor Mortimer, "discusses arrangements for ensuring that the matter of the king's indiscretion would be handled with appropriate discretion and finality. The language suggests that your mother's exile was coordinated at the highest levels of government." Captain Blackwood examined the letter and felt his blood run cold as he recognized the implications. Lord Chancellor Mortimer had died 5 years earlier, but his son, current Lord Chancellor William Mortimer, held one of the most powerful positions in the kingdom and would certainly view Jonathan's evidence as a threat to his family's reputation and political standing. "If these documents are authentic," the captain said grimly, "then we are dealing with a conspiracy that involves some of the most powerful families in the realm. The political implications extend far beyond questions of royal succession to include potential treason and abuse of governmental authority." Jonathan nodded solemnly. "That is precisely why I approached Princess Isabella rather than presenting my case through official channels. I feared that the same individuals who orchestrated my mother's exile might attempt to eliminate me if they learned of my return and my possession of incriminating evidence." Princess Isabella felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders as she realized that Jonathan's fate, and potentially the stability of the kingdom, now depended on her decisions and actions. She possessed evidence of serious governmental misconduct, but presenting that evidence publicly could destabilize the monarchy and provide enemies of the crown with powerful weapons for political manipulation. We need additional verification of this evidence before we can determine how to proceed, she decided. Captain Blackwood, are there reliable methods for authenticating these documents and confirming the details of the alleged conspiracy? The captain considered the question carefully, understanding that conventional investigation methods would be inadequate given the potential involvement of high-ranking officials in the cover-up. We would need to involve individuals whose loyalty and discretion are absolutely beyond question, and who possess the expertise to evaluate historical documents and political correspondence. I may be able to suggest someone, Jonathan offered. Sir Geoffrey Blackthorne maintained correspondence with several scholars and historians who specialized in royal genealogy and political history. If we could arrange for discreet consultation with one of these experts, we might be able to confirm or refute the authenticity of my evidence. Princess Isabella approved this approach, understanding that independent verification would be essential before she could consider presenting Jonathan's claims to her father or taking any other official action. However, she also realized that any investigation would need to be conducted with extraordinary secrecy to avoid alerting the potential conspirators to their activities. Captain, what are our immediate security concerns? If tonight's attackers represented the opening move in a larger campaign against us, what additional threats should we be prepared for? Captain Blackwood's expression grew even more grim as he considered their tactical situation. Your Highness, if powerful individuals within the palace hierarchy are involved in this conspiracy, then our standard security procedures may be compromised. We cannot trust normal communication channels, personnel assignments, or intelligence-gathering methods. The captain began outlining a series of security modifications that would isolate Princess Isabella from potential threats while allowing for discreet investigation of Jonathan's claims. These measures included changes to guard rotations, communication protocols, and daily routines that would make it difficult for conspirators to predict or interfere with their activities. Furthermore, he continued, we must assume that Jonathan remains a target for elimination. His evidence represents an existential threat to individuals who have spent decades covering up their involvement in governmental misconduct. They will not hesitate to use lethal force to protect their positions. Jonathan accepted this assessment with calm resolve, understanding that his decision to present his evidence had placed him in mortal danger. Captain, I am prepared to face whatever risks are necessary to ensure that the truth about my parentage and the conspiracy surrounding it becomes known. My mother suffered greatly to protect me from these individuals, and I will not allow her sacrifice to be meaningless. Princess Isabella felt a surge of respect for Jonathan's courage, recognizing in his determination the same stubborn resolve that characterized her father's approach to difficult situations. If Jonathan was indeed her brother, then he had inherited the royal family's legendary unwillingness to be intimidated by threats or political pressure. Then we proceed carefully but decisively, she announced. We will verify your evidence, identify the individuals involved in the historical conspiracy, and determine how to present this information in a manner that serves justice while protecting the stability of the kingdom. As they began planning their investigation into the decades-old conspiracy, Captain Blackwood realized that they were embarking on a dangerous journey that could fundamentally alter the political landscape of the realm. The evidence in Jonathan's possession had the potential to expose corruption at the highest levels of government, while simultaneously challenging the established understanding of royal succession. The success or failure of their efforts would determine not only Jonathan's fate and Princess Isabella's future, but potentially the survival of the monarchy itself in its current form. They were playing a game of political chess against opponents who had demonstrated their willingness to use lethal force to protect their secrets, and the stakes could not be higher. Outside the secure chamber, the palace continued its normal routines, with guards making their rounds and servants preparing for another day of royal business. However, beneath the surface of normalcy, forces were gathering that would soon test the foundations of the kingdom and the courage of those sworn to protect it. The conspiracy that